civil rights leaders dedicate their day to reflecting on your life, I'm at a loss for words, to be honest. Congressman Lewis gave so much and asked for so little. And so as we look forward, we need to remember the sacrifices of people like John Lewis, people who dedicate their life so that people like me could have opportunities.
His deputy chief of staff, it stuck out to me, remembered him as both human and divine. The Reverend Warnock, the senior pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, saying Lewis became a living, breathing, walking sermon for truth-telling. Former President Barack Obama, during the funeral a short time ago, called on Congress to carry on Lewis's work on voting rights. Take a listen.
If politicians want to honor John, and I'm so grateful for the legacy and work of all the congressional leaders who are here, but there's a better way than a statement calling him a hero. Right. You want to honor John? Let's honor him by revitalizing the law that he was willing to die for.
That, of course, the Voting Rights Act. You've worked in politics. Explain the significance of that statement. And at this point, do you see the restoration of the Voting Rights Act happening?
I would argue that the Voting Rights Act is the single most important piece of legislation in modern times, because what it did was it protected every American's right to vote and put protections in place so that disenfranchised communities, African American communities, would have special protections, so that states like Alabama, states like Mississippi, who had had histories of insidious acts to to stop African Americans from voting, would have special Justice Department protections. And when we failed to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, we took away many of those protections. And when the Supreme Court stripped away even further those protections, it made it harder for minority communities to vote. So not only should we reauthorize the Voting Rights Act, but President Obama was right. We need to make sure that every American is automatically registered to vote. We need to take it a step further.
Do you believe that that will happen, given the divisiveness in Congress?
I don't think it's going to happen in this administration. I'm not going to lie to you, but it will happen. You know, John Lewis, I'm sure, didn't believe when he walked across that bridge that immediately the Voting Rights Act would be passed. But he knew if he kept pushing on, if he kept marching, if he kept trying and kept the faith, that it would happen. And I feel the same way about the John Roberts Lewis Voting Rights Act. If we keep pressing on, if we keep, starting good trouble, eventually it will happen.
The congressman penned an op-ed shortly before his death. It was published today in the New York Times, and I just want to read a portion. He wrote, "When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide." He inspired generations. We saw a 12-year-old read Lewis's favorite poem. They just met 2 years ago, and they became friends. Talk about the late congressman's legacy and what we can do to continue his work.
John Lewis was one of the foot soldiers. He is someone who was the youngest person to speak at the March on Washington. I think back at his age, at 20, he was marching across a bridge, getting ready to be attacked by Alabama State officers. I can't imagine what that must have felt like. And honestly, don't believe that at 20 years old it's something I could have even comprehended or been able to do. But that conviction, that belief that this country was better than its moment, that we had the ability to improve and grow, was something that never faltered. And so as we move forward, As we watch a country that's deeply divided and is failing to live up to its obligations and its promises, we need to once again deal with that, have an open conversation, have some reconciliation, and remember the sacrifices of those that came before us. President Trump is the president, but he will not always be the president. And so what we need to do is talk about what we do after.
I do want to talk about the bridge. Where does the push to rename the Edmund Pettus Bridge go from here? And have you spoken with the family or anyone close to Congressman Lewis about this?
We're going to keep pressing on. When I originally started this project, I said that I hoped John Lewis would get to walk across that bridge one last time and see his name on that bridge. That's not going to happen, but I do 100% believe that he will be looking down, and one day he will see Edmund Pettus' name taken down and his replaced, because that is us living up to our obligation. But the name on that bridge is not as important as the legacy itself. John Lewis fought for each and every one of us. He fought for something bigger than himself and believed that we could always do better. And so in that spirit, the John Lewis Bridge Project will continue pressing on and continue pushing. We've spoken to state legislators, we've spoken to the community in Selma, we've reached out to his family, and we truly believe that this is just the first step in a long act of perfecting our union. And that means, taking down Edmund Pettus' name. That means reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act. And it also means trying to perfect our union, trying to make sure that every American, regardless of race, ethnicity, has opportunities. It means we have to keep working.
Michael Starr Hopkins, thank you so much for joining us as we reflect on this moment in history, honoring the civil rights legend, the late Congressman John Lewis. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And our coverage of the funeral and the procession